Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating deep dive into the hidden, everyday mechanisms of state control. We're going to unpack a concept that fundamentally changes how millions of people experience daily life, privacy, and community. It's called capillary power. Basically, it's the architecture of using your very own local neighborhood as the ultimate tool of administration and surveillance. Think about this for a second. How do you spy on millions of people without a massive secret police? It's a pretty compelling logistical problem, right? If you want absolute loyalty across an entire population, how do you actually enforce that? Secret police and hidden microphones are incredibly expensive. But as our source material outlines, there's actually a cheaper, far more durable route. You don't just watch the society. You turn the society itself into the surveillance device. To really understand how this works, I want you to imagine moving into a new apartment. You're carrying your boxes up the stairs, you're hoping for a fresh start. And somewhere on the ground floor, there's this older woman who just seems to know everyone. She knows who comes home late, who has unauthorized guests, and exactly who just bought a flashy new television. Now, in many parts of the world, that's just your classic nosy neighbor. But in the systems we're examining today, keeping track of all those little details is actually her state-mandated job. Section 1. The Ultimate Neighborhood Watch. Okay, let's dive into this table and look at the structural breakdown of North Korea's Inminban or People's Unit. This is literally the most basic social unit in the entire country. And notice the scale here. Historically, these encompassed about 25 to 50 families, but recent trends for 2025 and 2026 actually show the state miniaturizing these units down to just 20 households in border regions for even tighter, more granular control. They're led by the Inminban, who is usually a state-appointed middle-aged woman. She acts as the direct conduit between the local district committee and citizens' living rooms, so it perfectly blends mundane community maintenance with absolute, non-stop surveillance. Moving on to Section 2, weaponizing the community. So how does a structure like this actually function day-to-day? Well, the Inminban doesn't just watch you, it completely absorbs a resident's time and energy. The hidden cost here is sheer exhaustion. The unit conducts nightly surprise inspections for unauthorized guests, and they track minute details. Things like how often a family eats meat, which, could actually indicate black market wealth. Plus, they organize mandatory unpaid labor, like street sweeping and garbage removal, and they enforce weekly public self-criticism sessions. The sheer repetition of all this leaves citizens physically and mentally drained. They are simply too preoccupied and exhausted to ever question the broader system. Now, this model definitely isn't isolated to North Korea. Let's look at Cuba. There, the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, or CDR, were famously dubbed by Fidel Castro as the eyes and ears of the revolution. What makes the CDR uniquely effective is its duality. On one hand, they organize what look like fun political block parties, sharing food, organizing literacy campaigns, managing public hygiene. But on the other hand, they have dedicated vigilance officers strictly enforcing curfews and taking notes on who receives foreign packages. It seamlessly blends social support with a tight apparatus for reporting counter-revolutionary behaviors among neighbors. Shifting over to East Africa, we see another striking variation in Ethiopia's Capillary system. Here, the neighborhood surveillance is tied directly to agricultural survival. The Capillary acts as the primary local administration, but crucially, these local officials serve as the gatekeepers for vital state-distributed resources. We're talking seeds, fertilizer, and food assistance. This creates a massively powerful mechanism for compliance. If an individual expresses political dissent, officials can simply deny them life-sustaining resources, or even imprison them over fertilizer debts. The community unit literally holds the keys to starvation. Section 3. Blueprints of Betrayal. Modern authoritarian states didn't just invent these systems out of thin air. There is a super fascinating historical irony here. The North Korean Inminban system's roots don't actually begin with North Korean ideology. As we can see here, it was inherited from Japanese imperialists. They established Aegukban, or patriotic units, back in 1940 to squeeze labor and obedience from their colonial subjects. And then in 1946, instead of dismantling this imperial tool, Kim Il-sung actually kept the blueprint, renamed it, and just redirected its focus to serving the party state. We also see some really deep historical roots in the Soviet Union. Following the nationalization of housing, the state created the kommunalka, or communal apartment. Imagine being placed with random people, forced to share kitchens and bathrooms. And because of strict residence registration laws, people couldn't easily leave.
This forced proximity turned the shared kitchen into an absolute breeding ground for gossip, mutual paranoia, and betrayal. It basically embedded the state directly into the domestic sphere. 189,000. That is the staggering estimated count of unofficial collaborators utilized by the Stasi in East Germany. Think about that. In so many apartment buildings, a designated tenant was reporting directly to the secret police. Researchers note that this intense neighborhood-level betrayal created a lasting secrecy tax. Even decades later, it resulted in measurable drops in interpersonal trust and economic efficiency. Because when you are systematically trained to fear your own neighbor, community trust fundamentally fractures.
Section 4. Voluntary versus mandatory vigilance. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself, wait, don't democracies have neighborhood watches too? And the answer is yes, but this brilliantly illustrates the difference. The underlying philosophy is entirely opposite. A democratic neighborhood watch is outward-looking and completely voluntary. It's opt-in. Citizens look out for external threats like burglaries, and they act strictly in an advisory role to the police. Conversely, the authoritarian unit is inward-looking and inescapable. It focuses on internal ideological purity. You literally cannot opt out. It possesses real administrative power to penalize residents, deliberately fostering fear to ensure absolute discipline. And that brings us to the core concept defining all of these examples: capillary power. Just like the capillaries in your body are the smallest blood vessels reaching every single cell, capillary power is the extension of state authority into the most intimate, molecular levels of daily life. It succeeds precisely because it blends helpful community service with pervasive surveillance. It makes the state's presence feel like a completely normal, embedded part of the neighborhood. So let's look at how this translates into modern governance. In 2025, Vietnam launched a massive administrative revolution. They completely eliminated an entire mid-layer of local district government and consolidated 90,000 residential groups. Now, while the stated goal here is more efficient, autonomous community governance, the system actually continues to rely heavily on the fatherland front to gather public feedback while strictly monitoring the ideological orthodoxy of those neighborhoods. So the bureaucracy gets streamlined, but the neighborhood cell absolutely remains the foundational security link. Section 5. The digital upgrade. So, what exactly happens when you take these traditional, human-reliant networks and introduce 21st century technology? 700 million. According to the research, that is the estimated number of Skynet surveillance camera lenses operating across China as of late 2023. We are witnessing a truly terrifying leap in capability right now. That gossipy neighbor we talked about earlier, well, she is suddenly backed by an omnipresent digital infrastructure. China has actually formalized this with its highly sophisticated grid management system. They divide urban areas into blocks of roughly 300 to 500 households, and it operates on this 1+3+N staffing model. That's 1 police officer for broad oversight, 3 dedicated grid personnel doing actual door-to-door data collection, and N, which represents a variable number of community volunteers in red armbands. These grid workers don't just track crimes, they log residents' emotions, their opinions on policies, and they closely monitor key petitioner groups. It is a seamless, highly effective blend of grassroots human intelligence and high-tech mapping. And honestly, even North Korea is adapting to the digital age. As smartphones became more common, citizens engaged in this cyber cat-and-mouse game to view unsanctioned foreign media. The state's response? Turn the phone itself into an automated informant. Every phone features a Trace Viewer app that permanently logs user activity, and you can't delete it. It takes hidden screenshots every 5 minutes. A digital signature whitelist blocks any unauthorized apps or videos. And get this, even the keyboard software is designed to automatically flag and rewrite sensitive slang. Your phone is essentially doing the surveillance work for the state. But the absolutely crucial point is this. Traditional systems relied on humans, and humans have empathy, right? They take bribes, they get tired, they look the other way. The introduction of artificial intelligence fundamentally changes all of that. AI is unbribable and completely merciless. It doesn't just watch the citizens, it watches the human watchers, ensuring that local administrators can literally never selectively ignore the rules. Which leaves us with a pretty profound dilemma. These systems, whether they're rooted in shared Soviet kitchens or modern Chinese digital grids, they're fundamentally designed to erase the line between community trust and state administration. When your phone, your local volunteer, and your neighborhood auntie are all extensions of a state whose eyes are always open, where does society end and the government actually begin? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.